Pathfinder 2e ventures into new territory, allowing players to have monstrous characters for the first time. Some would say that this has been done before, and I'll say that it has, but not done as well. And within Pathfinder 2e, everything has been very close to humanoid. Nothing has resembled a true monster that you would see from the bestiary. We also saw with versatile heritages that you can have Dampiers or Asimars, but those are basically something within your lineage. It's not actually, you are not actually an angel, and you are not actually a vampire. You basically have a vampire in your lineage. So not quite the same. Since the beginning of the hobby, with D&D and the original box set, you could play monsters according to what was written, but Gary Gygax clamped down on that by the time he published 1e, a D&D, and there wasn't official support for being a monster until 3rd edition, pretty much, which had level adjustments. You could add class levels onto a stat block from the monster manual, and level adjustments were basically a negative modifier on your level. So if your monster or stat block had a level adjustment in 2, if you earned enough XP to be 3rd level, you would have 1 class level and grafted onto the top of that. Well, it was inelegant, and it also had a lot of balance issues. You had to sacrifice progression in your main class in order to get these improved stats and abilities at 1st level, some of which would be very powerful or would become obsolete, made obsolete by what you could do at higher levels. So it was not balanced. And with 5th edition D&D, we see that a lot of the races are don't really venture deep into the monster manual. There are some things, like you could be something like a fae, but a lot of the really cool stuff that a lot of the younger players at IGM want to be, like that are really monstrous, those really aren't available in 5th edition. And I would argue that that is due to 5th edition's limited chassis for characters. Historically, race is something that you just get at level 1, and you get a list of abilities, and you really can't give a level 1 character the ability to dominate somebody with your eyes, like from a vampire. You really can't have those iconic abilities from the monster manual given to 1st level characters. Pathfinder 2e, of course, allows you to gain abilities over time because of the feats system, and lets you gain feats within your ancestry. So there's that. Also, Wizards of the Coast has been moving towards making the different races less mechanically distinct from each other, partly as an effort to combat real-world stereotyping and to not have that reflected in their game, but also to allow for more build diversity so that you're not pigeonholed into picking something with a +2 dex in order to become a rogue. So overall, I think that is a positive change, but the structure of characters in 5e is making them go in this particular direction, which is not conducive to being a monstrous character. Enter Pathfinder 2e with the feat system so that you can have abilities that you gain on account of your ancestry over time. You can gain flight, not at level 1, but at a higher level. And this succeeds at giving Pathfinder the possibility of having a balanced way to have a monstrous ancestry, but also it is able to show that there's tremendous diversity within a particular ancestry. You can have one kobold that's very different from the next one via its kobold features, not just its class features, or one half-orc being a different kind of half-orc compared to another. And by expressing that diversity, using the feat system and the overall customizability of Pathfinder 2e, I think is just a more fun way of showing that not every kobold is the same. So how does Pathfinder do this? We see that with a vast majority of the undead that I'll go over, that they decided to make archetypes out of them, which is an interesting choice. Why not make them another ancestry? Well, first of all, before becoming undead, that creature was something else beforehand. It had a base ancestry. And, well, you might say, why not make a versatile heritage? Well, we'll see. One of the reasons, I think, is because the power of these abilities that undead get as monstrous ancestries is pretty strong. And so they didn't want to have you be able to increase the power of your character. They wanted to make sure that you're choosing to forego your powerful class feats in order to get abilities from this archetype, which is how archetypes work in 2e. Also, by having them be archetypes, you have just a lot more feats as your character advances to get abilities from an undead archetype, whereas an ancestry, you only get 5 of them over the course of your adventuring career. You get at least 10 class feats, or if you have a campaign that is uses the free archetype variant, you get at least 20 over the course of your adventuring career that you can use on these feats. Now, why the skeleton is its own ancestry, I'm not quite sure. My theory is that, well, what the book says is that skeletons have a radically different physiology, so they need an ancestry to account for that, which is true. But I also have another running theory, which is that a skeleton doesn't really have a lot of iconic, powerful abilities that you need to be expressed within a greater number of feats that you can get via an archetype. And a skeleton is basically a blank slate that you can just put some abilities on from here and there. Whereas a lot of the undead archetypes that we'll go over, we'll see that the dedication feat gives them some really core features in the dedication feat itself. Now, using undead in the campaign, you of course want to talk to your GM, because all of these undead have the rare trait, and you have to talk to your GM about how your character will die if it is not dead yet. By the way, this is a solution for player character death. Like if you want to be a ghoul, you have to die from ghoul fever. So you can't just let this, you can't just walk up to a ghoul in the campaign and be hopeful. You gotta talk to your GM probably. The fact that most of these are expressed through archetypes does mean you will need to do some respecking, which can be a little awkward, of the class feats that you had spent on other things before in order to have them now become undead feats. You also want to talk to your GM and other members of your group, because your negative healing feature is going to create a dynamic in which some effects that the GM is planning and healing abilities that the party has are not going to work the same with you. So you will want to talk to your group, and you may want to have your entire party be undead to avoid conflicts. And also, the Stitch Flesh feat is essential because Treat Wounds, by rule, does not work on you, the medicine skill, and the chief way, those without spammable healing magic are able to restore characters to full hit points between battles, which is essential in Pathfinder 2e. I'll go over the basic undead benefits that each of them gets when formed. First, you have negative healing, which means that positive healing magic does not work on you, and positive damage can be inflicted on you, and you heal from negative healing and are immune to negative damage. Then you learn the Necro language, which the book explains is what happens when negative energy infuses you. Your vision improves 1 step, so you get low light vision if you don't have it yet, and you get dark vision if you only have low light vision. Next is that you, unlike other undead, are not destroyed when you are brought down to 0 hit points. You gain the dying value just like living creatures do, and would be destroyed, not dead, at dying 4. Significantly, when you are destroyed, that's it. You cannot be resurrected. So that's very important, obviously. and the dying condition cannot be removed from you by other means, such as the stabilize spell. It looks like the only way you can actually be brought back is with gaining hit points. So it looks like Administer First Aid does not work on you. Battle Medicine, by the way, does not work on you, even if someone has the Stitch Flesh feat. So you really need someone who's going to help you in the healing department. You additionally are immune to death effects, which is great, and to effects that would automatically increase your dying value. However, you are subjected to other parts of that effect. You just don't, those two things don't happen. So Phantasmal Killer can do mental damage to you and give you a status effect, but it cannot kill you outright. Then you get +1 circumstance bonus against diseases and poisons, not immunity. So they made a compromise there in terms of what you can gain in immunity. You also have Undead Hunger, which means that depending on what type of undead you are, you have a insatiable yearning for something that drives you. And we'll see what they are each time. And you only need 4 hours of rest, not 8, in order to get your daily abilities. And it notes that this is usually during the day for undead creatures. I think that this is a concession to adventuring parties that have living party members so that they can do 12 hours of adventuring and you can sleep for only 4 of those. It also means that you get to be the night watch and cover the entire night shift. Okay, and there are feats that you can get for each undead type to give you the advanced undead benefits. You definitely have dark vision by this point if you didn't have it already. Your bonus against disease and poison doubles to +2, and you get a +1 circumstance bonus against paralysis and sleep effects. As we go over each undead type, I'm going to discuss first the iconic abilities that people with experience in D&D and Pathfinder know to expect in that undead creature, and talk about the design challenges that poses, and then look at what choices the designers made and the mechanical things that you can get. So we start with the ghost. We know ghosts for being incorporeal. They're able to pass through objects and walls. They can fly, and they're usually bound to the material world. Their spirit has not been able to move on to the afterlife because of something that keeps them here, some unfinished business. And so when you destroy a ghost in Pathfinder, it will rejuvenate possibly the next day. And despite being incorporeal, they can actually attack and do damage against corporeal creatures. So what does the dedication feat get you? It gets you some of these abilities. First of all, you cannot fly away from the ground. You're kind of hovering just above it. This lets you avoid difficult terrain and hazardous terrain. You can still leap and do jumps, but you are not actually touching the ground. Next is your incorporeality. It's a little unclear to me whether you can put part of yourself inside a wall, but what's definitely clear is that you cannot interact with physical objects and items. And what you need to do is you can spend 10 minutes for everything that's within arm's reach, incorporate physical objects into your incorporeal form, and vice versa. Any incorporeal objects you have, you can make them corporeal again. So this is your way to wield a magical weapon. And also that magical weapon has the ghost touch property for free in that it can damage incorporeal and corporeal creatures without any problems. You, however, are not able to do strength-based skill checks like tripping or shoving on corporeal creatures, nor can they do those to you. Your unarmed attacks become magical and do negative damage, and you also are bound to a particular site. When you are destroyed, you are not rejuvenated in the material plane. That's at a higher level. Instead, you are in some kind of limbo that you will need to talk to your GM to get out of. By the way, if you complete your unfinished business that would normally send a ghost to the afterlife, you can talk to your GM about your character staying in the material plane. Perhaps you have some other unfinished business or something else that you work out with your GM. Basically, it remains the choice of you and your GM as written on what your character's future is. Though if you are destroyed, it suggests that you become anchored to a summoner as an eidolon or something else that's not a main player character. The optional feats that you can get as a ghost give us the other iconic abilities. There's Frightful Moan, which lets you try to frighten any living creature within a 30-foot emanation from you. Then Ghostly Resistance gives you modest resistance to all damage, which is great in that it applies to each type of damage separately, and that doubles if it is non-magical damage. That resistance is bypassed if it's force damage, positive damage, or a weapon with the Ghost Touch property. Then Ghostly Grasp gives you the advanced undead benefits, and it lets you interact with the physical world like Patrick Swayze from the movie Ghost. And with a athletics or thievery check that DC 20, it does not go up. You can also, that includes being able to do strength-based skill checks like grappling with corporeal creatures. So yes, you can become a grappling spirit luchador from the Book of the Dead Bestiary. Ghost Flight at level 8 lets you untether yourself so you can actually fly upward, but only for 10 minutes, once per day. And the level 14 improvements of that takes away that time limit. You can fly all the time. Pass Through, which is available at level 10, lets you spend 3 actions to try to pass through an object, such as a wall or a door. And you have to do an acrobatics check. The DC depends on the object. And if you succeed, you treat it as difficult terrain. And then the level 12 feat Rejuvenation means that if you're destroyed, you get to reform at your bound site within 2d4 days. Next is the Ghoul, and the Ghouls are those feral, hungry creatures that want to kill and eat, and they paralyze living creatures that are not elves, and they also spread disease. And Ghasts, which are more advanced versions of ghouls, have a stench aura. We saw with the Ghost that a lot of its iconic abilities were quite powerful and took up nearly all of the optional feats. Here, the Ghoul has a little more design space, and we'll see what they do with it. The Ghoul Dedication feat gives you 2 unarmed attacks. You get Jaws and Claws. They both have the Finesse traits. They both benefit from Dexterity. And we have this new mechanic called, you get the Consume Flesh ability. And when you consume flesh, which is to eat a creature, you become satiated. And this is like a pseudo focus point pool that is 1 point, which fuels your abilities. And we'll see what it does as we go through the optional feats. But to consume flesh, it's 1 action, and you must be adjacent to a corpse that is small or larger, and it must have died within the past hour. So this means you can't walk around with a portable hole full of corpses. You have to continue to produce corpses, aka kill things, in order to have a new source. And once you are satiated, it lasts for 1 hour. So the optional feats we'll see go into the iconic abilities, but also they really make you much more mobile. And I don't know if this is new to Pathfinder 2e. Level 4, replenishing consumption, means once every 10 minutes when you consume flesh, you get to regain some hit points. Swift Leap is a level 4 feat, and this lets you leap as an action without provoking reactions. So this is a great way to go up to something in battle, and like a boss creature that has attack of opportunity, attack it, and then leap away. If you are satiated, you get to do a long jump or high jump with a single action. So it's like the quick jump skill feat, but you become hungry after. Feverish Enzymes is 2 actions, and it lets you attack with your claws or your jaws, and you deal negative damage instead. And in addition, you get to cut in half the amount of healing it receives until the start of your next turn. And if you are satiated and drop that condition while doing this, you get to make the duration 1 minute. And this strikes me as very powerful because imagine you're going up against a boss creature that has an ally that is healing it. You get to cut in half the hit points it gains. And also this affects fast healing and regeneration. So this seems pretty good. Grave Strength lets you have the advanced undead benefits. And when you're satiated, you get a +5 status bonus to your speed. Ghouls also have additional feats that they can choose, including Wall Run, that lets them run up a wall, Guarded Movement that gives them a big bonus against reactions based on movement, like attacks of opportunity, and Reactive Pursuit. So if something that is next to you tries to get away from you, you get to, as reaction, follow them. Paralyzing Slash takes 2 actions, and this lets you try to paralyze a creature. It has the incapacitation trait, so it's less effective against higher level creatures. It uses your spell DC or class DC. You can only do it once per creature, effectively, because they become temporarily immune to it for 24 hours. However, I don't see anyone becoming a ghoul who does not take this ability. It's the classic ability, and it's quite good, paralyzing a creature. And they get to make a new save at the end of their next turn to try to shake it off, but it could last a long time. Then Sickening Bite is available. It makes your saliva cause nausea. When you critically hit something, they get the Sickened 1 condition, which is one of the better conditions in Pathfinder 2e. And if you're satiated, you get to impose this condition with a regular success. Glutton for Flesh is basically increasing your pseudo focus point pool to 2. When you are satiated already, you get to consume flesh to become fully satiated, which is effectively like having 2 points in this pool. You get to, in order to empower one of the previous abilities, you lower yourself from fully satiated to only satiated, and then can do it again. Also, when you're fully satiated, that lasts 3 hours, and then downgrades to satiated, which lasts the normal 1 hour. And also, if you have Grave Strength, your +5 bonus to speed is doubled. Lastly is Corpse Stench, the highest level feat. It lets you have a 10-foot emanation in which any creature that starts their turn in that aura must make a Fortitude save against your class DC or spell DC, or else they become Sickened 1. And while in the aura, they have a -2 circumstance penalty to saves to try to recover from the sickened condition, and also against all disease. And if they critically fail against your aura, they are slowed 1 in addition. This is very good. It does not have the incapacitation trait, and if they succeed, they're immune for 1 minute, but still, it's really good. The downside is that this seems to work on all creatures, including your allies, and I would think that a party might want to sniff you before entering a room where they expect a battle so that they can succeed and become immune for a minute. I really like the design of the ghoul. I like the fact that you are constantly eating corpses. You are incentivized by the mechanics, and that sounds like fun to roleplay. And the feats cover all of the iconic abilities and more by going into the mobility that they have added to Pathfinder ghouls. Next is the Lich, which was the #1 talking point in all of the promotional materials and public statements by Paizo. Well, the Lich is our undead immortal spellcaster that has their soul in a soul cage, so that when you kill them, they reform around the soul cage. And this is an iconic creature in the history of Dungeons & Dragons, and historically a very powerful creature. So it's the one archetype that's not available at level 2. It's available at level 12. And you need to have the ability to cast 6th level or higher spells from spell slots, be an expert in crafting, and need to have completed a ritual to become a Lich and have crafted a soul cage. So this is a lot of talk to your GM there. And this presents a real design challenge, I would say, because the main class feature is the soul cage, aka phylactery, before Paizo changed the language, in order to honor the real world source of the word. And the problem is, okay, I don't know how most GMs run it, but when a character dies in my campaign, I usually let the player make a substitute, and many DMs, I think, have that replacement character be at the same level as the rest of the party in order to simplify bookkeeping and keep encounter balance simple. I usually have it be one level down, and then they have a temporary level penalty until they've adventured enough time with the main party. So the main benefit of the Lich is obviated by how I run my table and how I think most GMs run their table, and not most GMs don't have you start at level 1 or drastically lower level. And so they have to account for this ability, and while still accord feats to it, while still according feats to its other significant iconic abilities, which are some kind of damage resistance, usually, having the ability to impose grave fear in others, and having a negative energy touch. So what do we see? So the Lich dedication lets you have your soul in a soul cage. You get the basic undead benefits, and your undead craving is for knowledge. You reform in 1 to 10 days in your soul cage if you ever get destroyed. So that's it. That's your main ability. It's the ability to reform without your magic items. Hopefully your party members retrieved them when you died at your soul cage. And the benefit here is you don't have to pay anything to get resurrected. That's one thing. And you get to keep the same character. Level 14 has a number of feats. The first is Drain Soul Cage, which I believe is only for wizards, because you need to have the Drain Bonded Item ability, and which normally lets you recast a spell that you cast that day. What Drain Soul Cage does is, first of all, that bonded item is your Soul Cage, which you do not need to have on your person. Once per day, the spell that you cast when you drain it does not have to be something that you had prepared for today and have already cast. So if you can have a spell book with a lot of spells, including a lot of lower level utility spells, and have access to all of them at all times with this ability. It seems very good. Enshroud Soul Cage gives more protection to your soul cage so that you're mentally alerted if it ever comes under attack. And it also always benefits from the magic aura and non-detection spells. And efforts to divine it need to succeed on a counteract check against it. I am critical of this feat. I think it should have been part of the base feat, and I think having the problem of having enemies hunt down your soul cage is probably something to work out with your GM if you want that to be a challenge. It should probably by default be not detectable, and also we'll see there is another feat, level 16, to bolster soul cage to make it not completely flimsy when attacked. By default, it has hardness 9 and 36 hit points. So when you get that mental alert, that level 14 creature will have destroyed it already, and that would be too bad. I think a number of these should have just been default. It just seems a shame to have a feat tax on the soul cage. So Hand of the Lich is level 14, and this lets your fist be a lethal attack by default, do a little more damage on average, and it does negative damage instead of bludgeoning. And when you critically hit, the creature is slowed 1 until the end of your next turn, and that is a critical specialization effect. Liches also have an additional feat that they can take, Magic Sense, which lets them always have first level detect magic constantly on, and they can seek using the effect of third level detect magic. Level 16 has Spell Gem, which lets you have a gem embedded into your forehead that has one spell that can be cast per day, a 6th level version of Repulsion, Scrying, or True Seeing, and this naturally heightens as you level up. And at level 20, your gem can also drain its energy to do spell turning at 8th level. The highest level feat is the 18th level feat Frightful Aura, which lets you, in a 15-foot emanation, any enemy, it's restricted to enemies, so that's good, that enters your aura or ends its turn in the aura must attempt a will save or become frightened. I was disappointed by the Lich archetype. A lot of the feats are required to install a burglar alarm and increase the security of your soul cage, which I think should have been part of the dedication feat, and defeats the purpose of, the whole point is to have that security with your dedication feat. It defeats the purpose to create these taxes in addition. And the Drain Soul Cage ability is pretty powerful, but thematically, it's kind of, a lot of these are not really going into new territory. And we don't have the ability to reduce damage to you, which maybe there could have been some adaptation of what the Ghost has for the Lich. And as we're going to see with the Mummy and the Skeleton, there's a lot of cool abilities like turning into a cyclone of bones or sucking in the life force of people in front of you, that there's nothing like that for the Lich. And honestly, I would allow characters, players who have a Lich to maybe get a few choice feats from some of these other undead archetypes. Next is the Mummy, and the iconic abilities for this, in my opinion, are resistance to vulnerability to fire. Their touch can create a wasting disease, and they also paralyze with fear people who encounter them. The dedication feat already delivers on giving you fire vulnerability, while also giving you the toughness feat. The fire vulnerability is half your level. Seems like a good trade to me. And your fist attack loses the non-lethal trait. It does lethal damage by default. And I didn't know this about the lore of the mummies or the history of mummies in the hobby, but you are very much wedded to a certain terrain, whether that be Arctic, desert, mountain, or swamp, depending on how you were preserved. And the optional feats tie into that, in addition to the other abilities I knew about. One with the land lets you ignore non-magical difficult terrain in one of those 4 terrain types, and also ignore things that conceal your vision in that type, depending on the type. Semblance of Life means that when you do attack with your fist or use one of the higher level abilities to inhale life force from people, you actually look like your living self for the next hour. Grave Mummification gives you the advanced undead benefits and gives you resistance to damage that you take from your bound terrain, such as from temperature or hazardous terrain or environmental hazards. Mummy's Despair takes 2 actions and means for 5 rounds, any creature that enters or begins its turn in a 30-foot emanation around you must do a will save or be frightened. And if anyone who succeeds is temporarily immune for 10 minutes. If your party knows it's coming up against a short battle, you might want to do this before the battle because it seems to affect your allies as well. Accursed Touch lets you, it's the classic mummy ability where you touch something, and if you with your fist attack, and if you critically hit, it does persistent negative damage to the creature. Storm Shroud lets you gain concealment because of a mist or something that's specific to your terrain now conceals you. And it's one way, unlike a lot of sources of concealment that are environmental in nature. So that's good, and you can use it once per hour. That seems like a good defensive buff that you could use many times per day. Channel Rot lets you transfer that potential critical hit doing persistent negative damage to your weapon, not just your fist attack. Ensnaring Wrappings lets you, as a reaction, whenever you do physical damage to a creature, you get to try to grapple it with your wrappings. Terrain Form lets you spend an action to collapse into matter appropriate to your terrain, and it's the effect of the gaseous form spell. And you do it once per day. And Desiccating Inhalation lets you inhale the life force in of creatures in a 30-foot cone in front of you that does negative damage to them, and you regain hit points equal to your level if only one takes damage from it. And which is nearly every time, since they have to critically succeed to avoid taking damage. Greater Despair lets your Aura of Despair ability possibly paralyze a creature, including possibly an ally. It also has the Incapacitation trait now, so it modifies your Aura of Despair from before and actually makes it weaker against higher level creatures. And so I don't think that's a good choice. I think that the character should not be made weaker by this feat against higher level creatures. What if they just want the frightened effect, for example, and would settle for that? They should at least have the choice on whether to go for the higher paralysis effect or not. I like the Mummy. There's a lot of feats here. There's 12 of them, and they run the gamut, cover the iconic abilities. The terrain one seemed a little niche to me. But being able to suck in life force from people and make everybody frightened, that all sounds pretty good. Next is the Skeleton, which is a fully developed ancestry, and we see what I said earlier, that it's kind of a blank slate that lets them put in a lot of ideas. It has 6 hit points, which is a little below average. It has a high dexterity and charisma, flaw in intelligence, and it is undead with the basic undead benefits. The heritages each adhere to one of the whatever your base form was before you became a skeleton. Fodder is a humanoid that is medium-sized, so and they get a bonus to speed. Compact Skeleton is small humanoids, and they get to squeeze more readily and avoid tight spaces being treated as difficult terrain. Sturdy Skeleton is for humanoids that are stockier, like dwarves, and they get 10 hit points instead of 6 and have the Die Hard feat. Last is the Monstrous Skeleton. For a beast or a monstrous humanoid, you get an unarmed attack that does d6, and it could be something like a wing or a horn. And we have a list of ancestry feats. As in Life, So in Death gives you the Adopted Ancestry feat, and it lets you appear as that ancestry if you're covered, if your body is covered. And okay, I don't really know why this ability is defined. If your body's covered, the fact that you're not alive is not obvious, I think. And it seems like it's strange that it's limited to the skeleton and that you would need this feat to be able to pass off as only a specific type of ancestry. So you could look like a gnome but not a halfling. It just seems strange to me. The benefit is that you don't have to make deception checks. Then Collapse is a reaction. If something critically hits you, you get to collapse and become flat-footed, but you also downgrade the damage from critical hit damage to normal damage, and it takes an action to stand up. Play Dead is another feat that I'm not sure why it's being defined. It lets you pretend you're dead. I read somewhere online that the benefit is that you don't have to actively make deception checks, they have to actively seek you. But it seems strange to me that this would require a feat, since you're already a skeleton. And I don't know, I thought it should have been a base ability. Undead Empathy lets you communicate with mindless undead, so long as there are no living creatures around. But if they're under the control of somebody else, you have to critically succeed on your diplomacy check. But yeah, you can communicate with them and also make simple requests. Past Life gives you a skill, and also the additional lore feat from your life. Well Armed is interesting. It lets you spend an action to detach your arm, and if your next action is to attack something, it increases your reach by 5 feet, and you get to attack with that arm. And if your next action is to attack with it something that is newly within your reach, your longer reach, they are flat-footed to it. So that sounds fun to do. Bone Missile lets you, when you fire a bow, you can, as part of that action, as part of firing an arrow, lose a couple of hit points in order to add negative damage to your arrow shot. So it's a spur of bone that travels with the arrow. And Rejuvenation Token means that you aren't irrevocably destroyed. You can be restored with the Resurrection Ritual. What's interesting is that it's a object that you are anchored to, and when the ritual happens, you are restored with that object in your possession, and you have to spend a week of downtime to anchor yourself again, so that you can do this again. But this is a way to get around being destroyed. Skeletal Resistance seems powerful. It gives you resistance to piercing damage, slashing damage, cold damage, electricity damage, and fire damage, and increases as you level up. Skeletal Transformation lets you cast the Animal Form spell on yourself, but it's a few levels down from what a spellcaster your level could cast, to be a skeletal form of that creature. Skeleton Commander gives you the Create Undead ritual, where you get to create 3 types of undead that all must be skeletal, and you get to do the ritual yourself, unlike for most people with the Create Undead ritual. And this has the issues of the costs of Create Undead, which I go over in my previous video. And you also get the +2 bonus to the main check. Bone Swarm, you get to turn yourself into a swarm. Sounds totally fun. You get to be a huge creature that enters people's spaces and attacks. Necromantic Air lets you cast the Harm spell once every hour. A 6th level version of Harm, but it's once every hour, and that seems quite good since you could do it multiple times per day. Overall, I like this Ancestry, and I just thought a couple of feats were not necessary, but everything's very thematic. Next is the Vampire archetype, and vampires have a dozen iconic abilities. I'm not going to list them all. The Vampire has certain vulnerabilities, though, this archetype does, which I think make it pretty unappealing. First is Revulsion. If somebody spends an action to brandish garlic or a symbol of a non-evil deity, and you're within 10 feet of it, well, first of all, you cannot go within 10 feet of it, period. But if for some reason you are within the area, you are going to be fleeing on your next turn until you are more than 10 feet away from it, and you have to spend an action to get over your Revulsion, which is DC 25, which as you level up becomes easier and easier. But it's still temporary. It's only 1 to 6 rounds that you get over it. 1 hour on a critical success. Then there's Sunlight, which makes you slowed after 1 turn, slowed 1, and then that increases every turn you're in the sun. And when you become so slowed that you are have no actions, you die or you're destroyed. And that is pretty severe. So you would need to obviously only do this if your campaign allows you to avoid the sun. Okay, the Vampire Dedication gives you those vulnerabilities. It gives you a Fangs unarmed attack with a grapple trait. No finesse trait, so you need strength here. And you get the Drink Blood action, which lets you, if something is restrained or grappled, or unconscious or willing, and is adjacent to you, you get to make them drained, and you gain temporary hit points that last for 10 minutes. And if you're only grabbing them, that requires a check. And what's nice about that is that there's no multiple attack penalty involved. You just automatically do it. You cannot do this multiple times against the same target. Clinging Climber lets you climb, gives you climb speed. Manipulative Charm gives you a +1 circumstance bonus to lie, make an impression, or gather information. And it lets you once per day cast the Charm spell on a creature. And it's implied that it's a first level Charm spell, but that heightens as you level up. Then Nocturnal Kindred lets you communicate with bats, rats, and wolves, and once per day you get to cast the Animal Allies feat, which lets you attack a small area with basically a swarm when you cast it. Daywalker lets you not be destroyed when you're in the sun, but you're still slowed, and so this is like the Lich Soul Cage problem. It makes something that's less crappy for you, which I wish had just been part of the base ability. Predatory Claws gives you a claw unarmed attack, and if you hit the same creature twice in the same turn, you get to attempt to grapple it, which does not seem good to me because I think that grapple has the -10 multiple attack penalty. Vicious Fangs makes it so that your Fangs on a critical hit does persistent bleed damage. Bat form lets you turn into a bat. You can get it at 10th level, and you have to level up a few levels for it to have some combat utility, but still it's a low spell level for your level. Bat form you get to use once per hour. Turn to Mist lets you use the gaseous form spell once per day. Coffin Bound makes it so that when you're destroyed, you're not actually destroyed, and if you're returned to your coffin within an hour, you can start to heal back up again. You need to be resting in your coffin for at least an hour for you to start healing. And your party needs to transport you, and you only have 1 hour to get there, and your coffin, I assume, is not being carried by the party. So the party needs to get you there quick, I guess with a teleport spell. If you have Turn to Mist, you can also get Mist Escape, which when you go down to 0 hit points, you have the option of turning into mist and going straight to your coffin. You go directly there. One good thing about gaseous form is that it can go through cracks in walls. I was thinking about this. What could they just follow you to your coffin? And you normally want to keep that a secret, but you can go into cracks around doors, is what I meant to say. So that's good. And then Dominating Gaze lets you try to dominate a creature. You can get it at 16th level, but it's a 7th level casting, which means you can only, to avoid the incapacitation trait, you would be able to use it against 14th level targets or lower without having to deal with the incapacitation trait. It is inherent to you. You don't have to use a spell slot, but it is once a day, and it heightens as you level up. I am critical of the vampire's vulnerabilities being so debilitating. I would have hoped that maybe they would have powered up the feats a little bit to compensate for that. But anyway, it's very thematic and expresses what a vampire is. The last undead type is the zombie, and zombies are known for being vulnerable to slashing damage and for being slow, but usually hitting hard from what I've seen in D&D and Pathfinder. And only some of those things are expressed mechanically here. Okay, so the zombie dedication, first of all, reduces your speeds by 5 feet, and it makes your fist lethal by default. And we introduce a new mechanic. Every day after your rest period, you become deteriorated, and you need to spend either your daily preparations or 10 minutes to reassemble your body, get it back together. When you are deteriorated, you are slowed 1, and there's no way to remove that condition except for that 10 minutes. And that's a big penalty. And you get to risk becoming deteriorated again in order to get a greater effect from the feats that we're about to go over. You you definitely do not want to fail on that check. You also gain a Jaws unarmed attack, which does a big D8 of damage, and you can only do that against a creature that is grabbed or restrained by you. We go on to the optional feats. Ankle Biter means that you can fight pretty well when you're prone on the ground. You're harder to hit by ranged attacks. You have a bonus to trip creatures, and you get to ignore the penalty to your attacks while you're prone. However, remember, you're still flat-footed. And you can crawl at half your speed. You can risk becoming deteriorated again by crawling your full speed, and you avoid becoming deteriorated with a DC 6 flat check. And that's how all of these feats work to avoid becoming deteriorated. Feast lets you spend 2 actions to get some healing from a dead or unconscious or restrained creature that is adjacent to you. And you get temporary hit points equal to half your level. And you get to increase that to double your level at the risk of becoming deteriorated. Ravenous Charge is kind of like Sudden Charge for martials. You spend 2 actions to stride up to a creature, 1 stride, and then you can try to grapple them. And if you successfully grapple them, you get to do a Jaws strike against the creature. It looks like the multiple attack penalty applies to that strike. Brains lets you, when you feast, eat the brains of a humanoid, and this is really weird. It gives you a bonus to your recall knowledge checks, and if your victim would have gotten a higher bonus than you on their check, you have a higher bonus to your recall knowledge check because you've eaten their brain. Numb is the feat that gives you the advanced undead benefits, and you're more zombie-like, so you have a bonus against pain and emotion effects. And when you're deteriorated, this actually increases the bonus, and you get to treat a success on a save against one of those effects as a critical success. Out of Hand is bizarre. You get to spend an action to detach an arm from yourself, and it basically acts as a familiar that can make fist attacks on creatures. However, its speed is only 5 feet and has to be within 100 feet of you, and it can interact with things as well, and it shares your multiple attack penalty. Thankfully, you can reattach it to yourself with 1 action. However, if it was destroyed, it takes 10 minutes to do that. Shamble lets you spend 2 or 3 actions to basically ignore difficult terrain and even greater difficult terrain, to basically run at something. And you can also ignore circumstance and status bonuses to your speed, but at the risk of becoming deteriorated. Unkillable seems strong. As a reaction, if you would be reduced to 0 hit points, you're instead reduced to 1 hit point at the risk of becoming deteriorated. So you get to stay on your feet, and even better, you get to do this once per hour. So that seems pretty strong. Festering Wounds means that damage you do with your unarmed strikes is harder to heal with the medicine skill. Even impossible. They have to do a counteract check against you to succeed. Not sure how useful this is in the typical campaign, because creatures you wound, they're usually destroyed or killed at the end of the battle. This does not affect battle medicine. It only affects the 10-minute treat wounds activity by your enemies. So anyway, Seize is the last feat, and it's a 12th level feat. Basically, when you make a fist strike and you succeed, it becomes grabbed to you, and you get to do your Jaws attack next, and the grab happens without increasing your multiple attack penalty. So Fist Strike adds at no penalty, and Jaws at -5, so that seems pretty good. This looks similar to Combat Grab, which is one of the additional feats that a zombie can take, which is at a much lower level, but that had the press trait, so this is more useful than that because you get to open with it. And the other additional feats are Bashing Charge, which lets you stride forward and try to destroy an obstacle in the way, and Corpse Stench from the Ghoul archetype, and Crushing Grab, which lets you do damage when you grapple. And then there's Corpse Stench, which we remember from the Ghoul archetype, which is a 10-foot emanation that always exists that also affects your allies, which can make creatures sickened, and if they critically fail, slowed as well. I like the zombie. I think it's one of the highlights. I like the feats. There's a wide variety of them. And the deterioration mechanic sounds fun. And that DC 6, you could save a hero point for it and pretty much almost guarantee that you'll succeed. But that penalty of being slowed is pretty bad. And perhaps more interesting because of that fact. So that's my overview of the undead options, and that was a lot to cover. I think I'd love to see what Paizo comes out in the future, if they're going to explore this design space more with other monstrous ancestries, or archetypes in this case. And yeah, I'd like to know what you thought your favorite undead creature, undead type was. For me, I think I really liked the Ghoul. It just seems like fun to be a melee character that's running around and darting in and out of battle, and is constantly eating flesh throughout the day. And let me know if you agree with my criticisms as well. All right, so that's the end of my Book of the Dead series. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to do more Pathfinder 2e content and also start looking at the next edition of D&D and my thoughts on that. And if my Discord community, join that as well, where we're running free Pathfinder 2e pickup games. And please support my Patreon. You'll get early access to my videos. And it's the main source of my support for doing this channel. So, oh, and I hope to commission some artwork for a skit that I'm writing with the proceeds from the Patreon. And that's it. So if you enjoyed the video, please like it, and I will see you next time.